The cold autumn wind howls across the plains, rattling the loose timbers of the barn and searching for any crack to invade the warmth within. Inside, Elias Thorne moves with the quiet economy of a man long accustomed to solitude. He checks on his mare, her soft wicker a familiar comfort in the echoing darkness. But tonight, something is different. A sound, faint and out of place, drifts from the loft above, a soft sigh, too human to be the wind, too gentle to be a stray animal. His hand rests instinctively on the hilt of the hunting knife at his belt as he ascends the ladder, his steps silent on the worn wooden rungs. In the dim light filtering through a grimy window, he sees them, a woman and a small boy, curled together in the clean hay of an empty stall, fast asleep. Her arm is thrown protectively over the child, her face etched with an exhaustion so profound it looks like pain. They are trespassers, yet all he feels is a hollow ache in his chest, a ghost of a memory he has spent 5 years trying to bury. Danger's close, and a rescue might be at hand. Before we see if justice or peril finds them, share in the comments. What's your favorite story about someone being saved against the odds? And if you're rooting for them, hit like and subscribe. The woman's dress is frayed, the boy's clothes little more than thin rags against the encroaching chill of the Wyoming night. They have nothing but each other. Elias knows he should be angry, or at least wary. A lone man on a remote ranch is a target. But looking at the fierce, unconscious tenderness in the woman's hold on her son, he sees not a threat, but a reflection of a life he once had. He sees his Sarah and the infant daughter they lost to the fever that followed. The coldness in his heart, a constant companion since their passing, cracks just enough to let a sliver of pity in. He retreats as silently as he came, his mind a maelstrom of duty, memory, and a strange, unwelcome surge of protectiveness. He knew then, standing in the cold heart of his own barn, that his solitude had just been breached, and he was not at all sure he wanted it back. Elias had inherited the Thorne Ranch from his father, a spread of land that was as stubborn and unforgiving as the man who had first tamed it. After Sarah and the baby were gone, the land was all he had left. He worked it from before sunrise until long after sunset, the physical exhaustion a welcome anesthetic for the gnawing grief that lived in the quiet corners of his 2-room cabin. The silence of the house was the hardest part. It was a living thing, amplifying the absence of a woman's hum or a child's cry. He had left a thick wool blanket at the foot of the ladder that first night, along with a canteen of water and a wrapped piece of jerky. He didn't want to frighten them. When he returned at dawn, the offerings were gone, but so were they. A pang of something akin to disappointment struck him, sharp and unexpected. He scanned the vast, empty horizon, but they had vanished as if they were spirits. It was 2 days later that he found them again, not in the barn, but huddled behind a rock outcropping a mile from his cabin, trying to snare a rabbit with a piece of twine. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, was shivering violently, his face pale and smudged with dirt. The woman stood over him, her expression a desperate mix of defiance and fear when she saw Elias approaching on his horse. He reined in Apollo a good distance away, dismounting slowly. He held up his empty hands. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The woman's eyes, a startling shade of green in her gaunt face, narrowed with suspicion. She pushed the boy further behind her. "We'll be on our way. We were just resting." "There's a blizzard rolling in from the north," Elias stated, ignoring her claim. "You won't last the night out here." "Not him," he nodded toward the child. The boy peeked out, his eyes wide and frightened. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight went out of her, replaced by the crushing weight of her reality. "We have nowhere else to go. You can stay in the barn," he offered. "It's warm. I'll bring you food." She studied his face, searching for a trick, for the cruelty she was clearly expecting. Elias Thorne's face was not a kind one, not anymore. It was weathered by the sun and carved by loss, his gaze steady and serious. But there was no malice in it. After a long, tense moment, she gave a single, jerky nod. He led them back, the woman walking with a pronounced limp he hadn't noticed before, the boy clutching her hand. He settled them in the barn again, this time bringing them a proper meal of stew and fresh bread from the cabin. He watched from a distance as she made the boy eat first, her own hunger secondary. Her name, he learned, was Clara. The boy was Samuel. She offered no surname, and he didn't ask for one. Secrets were heavy things, and he had enough of his own to carry. That night, the blizzard hit with a fury that shook the very foundations of the cabin. The wind screamed like a banshee, and snow piled in great drifts against the door. Elias sat by his hearth, the fire casting flickering shadows on the wall where Sarah's portrait used to hang. He'd taken it down a year ago, the sight of her smiling face too painful to bear. He thought of Clara and Samuel in the barn, protected from the worst of the storm, but still separate, still in the cold. It felt wrong. Against his better judgment, against every instinct for self-preservation he had honed over 5 lonely years, he pulled on his coat, lit a lantern, and battled his way through the tempest. He found them huddled under a mountain of hay and his donated blankets, Sam whimpering in his sleep. Clara was awake, her eyes wide in the lantern light. "You can't stay out here," he shouted over the wind. "The roof could go. Come to the cabin." Fear warred with necessity on her face. To enter a strange man's home was a different kind of danger, one she likely knew all too well. But the howl of the storm and the tremor in the barn's old beams made the decision for her. She gathered the sleeping boy into her arms and followed Elias, her head bowed against the stinging snow. Inside the small cabin, the warmth was immediate and enveloping. He gestured to the single cot in the corner. "You and the boy can take that. I'll sleep by the fire." She laid Samuel down, tucking the blankets around him with practiced care before turning to face Elias. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you helping us?" Elias looked away, toward the cold, empty space on the wall. "No one should be out in a storm like this," he said gruffly. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was tangled up in the memory of a small, feverish body in his arms and a wife's final, desperate whisper. He couldn't save them. The thought of failing to save these two, right here on his own land, was unbearable. The blizzard raged for 3 days. The cabin became their entire world. The initial awkwardness slowly gave way to a quiet, functional rhythm. Clara, it turned out, was a silent and efficient worker. Once she saw that Elias meant her no physical harm, she began to repay his charity with labor. She cleaned the cabin until it shone, mended his torn shirts with neat, tiny stitches, and cooked meals that made the sparse stores of flour, beans, and salted meat taste like feasts. She moved with a purpose that seemed to keep her demons at bay. Elias watched her, intrigued. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and her past remained a locked room. But he saw flickers of her true self in small moments. He saw it in the way she'd hum a tuneless song to Sam when she thought no one was listening, or in the brief, genuine smile that touched her lips when the boy laughed. He noticed the faint, discolored bruises on her wrist, a map of old hurts she tried to keep hidden beneath her sleeves, and the way she flinched if he moved too quickly. He began to piece together a story of flight from a heavy-handed man. Samuel, however, was less guarded. After the first day of hiding behind his mother's skirts, his natural curiosity won out. He started following Elias on his chores inside the cabin, asking simple, direct questions. "Why is the fire hot? Where does the snow go?" Elias, who hadn't spoken to a child in 5 years, found himself answering patiently, the sound of his own voice strange in the gentle cadence of explanation. One afternoon, Sam pointed to the faint outline on the wall where the portrait had hung. What was there? Elias froze. Clara shot her son a warning look, but the question was already out. Elias cleared his throat. "A picture," he said, his voice thick. "Of my wife. And my daughter." Sam's brow furrowed. "Where are they?" "They went to heaven," Elias said simply. The boy considered this. "Is that far?" "Very far." Sam walked over and, with the unthinking empathy of a child, placed his small hand on Elias's large, calloused one. "You can play with me," he offered. "So you won't be lonely." A dam broke inside Elias Thorne. He didn't weep. He hadn't in years, but a wave of emotion so powerful it stole his breath washed over him. He looked over at Clara, who was watching them, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. In that shared moment of sorrow and understanding, the invisible wall between them began to crumble. They were no longer just a man and a refugee. They were two grieving souls finding a strange, fragile shelter in each other's presence. When the snows finally melted enough for travel, the subject of her leaving hung unspoken in the air. Elias found he couldn't bring himself to mention it. The thought of returning to the suffocating silence of the cabin was now intolerable. The sound of Sam's chatter and the quiet industry of Clara's presence had become a part of the home's heartbeat. He decided to make a trip into the town of Redemption for supplies. It was a risk. A strange woman and child on his ranch would set tongues wagging. He asked Clara if she and the boy needed anything. "No," she said quickly, a flicker of the old fear back in her eyes. "We'll be fine here. We won't be any trouble." "It's no trouble," he insisted. He felt an urge to buy the boy a proper coat, to see Clara in a dress that wasn't threadbare. The trip to Redemption was as he expected. Mrs. Gable, the proprietor of the general store and the town's primary source of gossip, eyed his large order of provisions with a sharp gaze. "Expecting company, Elias?" she asked, her voice laced with insinuation. "Just stocking up for the season," he grunted, avoiding her eye. As she was tallying his bill, her gaze drifted to the sheriff's notice board. "Another poster up for that Jedediah Finch," she commented idly. "Says he was last seen over in Laramie, asking after a woman and a boy. A brute of a man, by all accounts. Imagine being the woman tied to a man like that." Elias's blood ran cold. He casually glanced at the board. The crudely drawn face on the wanted poster was harsh and cruel, with a distinctive scar bisecting one eyebrow. It was for assault and horse theft, but the description of the man asking after a woman and child hit him like a physical blow. He paid his bill, his hands tight, and left without another word. The ride back to the ranch was a torment. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. He now had a name and a face for the fear that haunted Clara's eyes. Jedediah Finch. He was looking for them, and he was getting closer. When he got back to the cabin, he found Clara in the yard, teaching Sam how to skip stones across the meltwater puddle near the trough. She was laughing, a sound so rare and beautiful it stopped him in his tracks. The sight of her, momentarily free and happy, solidified a resolution in his heart. He would not let that man find them. He would not let that laughter be extinguished. That evening, after Sam was asleep, Elias sat across from her at the small table. He pushed the wanted poster across the worn wood. "Clara," he said softly, "is this him?" She stared at the paper, and all the color drained from her face. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. She didn't need to answer. The terror in her eyes was confirmation enough. She finally looked up at him, her expression shattered. "He'll kill me," she whispered, her voice raw. "For running. For taking his son." "No, he won't," Elias said, his own voice a low, hard growl. "Because he won't find you. This is your home now. If you'll have it." Clara stared at him, bewildered. I don't understand." "I'm offering you and the boy protection," he explained, leaning forward. "My name. My roof. Jedediah Finch is looking for Clara, a runaway woman. He won't be looking for Mrs. Thorne, the rancher's wife." The implication of his words hung between them, heavy and profound. A marriage. A sham. Of course, a shield built of paper and lies, but a shield nonetheless. For her, it meant safety. For him, it meant inviting a permanent storm into his life, defying convention, and facing down a dangerous man. It meant an end to his solitude, once and for all. "You would do that?" she breathed, her green eyes searching his. "For us? A stranger?" Elias looked at the small cot where Samuel slept, his face peaceful in the firelight. He thought of the laughter in the yard, of the warm meals and mended shirts. He thought of the quiet companionship that had filled the gaping void in his life. "You're not strangers anymore," he said, and it was the truest thing he had said in 5 years. She didn't answer immediately. She stood up and walked to the small window, looking out into the vast, dark expanse of the plains. For years, that darkness had represented threat and uncertainty. Now, within the walls of this small cabin, with this quiet, steadfast man, it seemed different. It was a barrier, a fortress. She was being offered a chance not just to survive, but to live, to see her son grow up without fear. Turning back to him, with tears streaming silently down her face, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They were married by a traveling circuit judge 2 weeks later, in a brief, unceremonious affair in the town's courthouse. Elias stood tall and solemn in his best coat, Clara beside him in a simple blue dress he'd bought for her, her hand trembling in his. The judge, A man more interested in his fee than in the circumstances pronounced them man and wife with a bored thud of his stamp. To the gossips of redemption, it was a scandal, the grieving widower Elias Thorne marrying some stray he'd picked up. But to Elias and Clara, it was the forging of an alliance, a pact made against the darkness. Life on the ranch settled into a new kind of normal. They were husband and wife in name, but they maintained a respectful distance. Clara moved her things from the cot to the small spare room Elias had always used for storage. They were partners in work, falling into an easy rhythm of shared labor. He taught her to shoot the rifle, not just for hunting, but for defense. She handled the weapon with a steady hand that surprised him. She was not a fragile thing. She was a survivor. Slowly, the fear in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence. She started to smile more, and the sound of her laughter was no longer a rarity. Samuel thrived. He called Elias Eli now, following him everywhere, a small, devoted shadow. The boy was the bridge between them, his unconditional affection making it easier for them to navigate the uncharted territory of their arrangement. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Clara spoke of her past. She told him of Jedediah, of his charm that had curdled into possessive rage, of the beatings that came for no reason, of her terror not for herself, but for what Sam was witnessing. She had saved for a year, a penny here, a stolen dime there, until she had enough to buy a train ticket west to anywhere. She had run with nothing but the clothes on her back and the sun she refused to let him break. Elias listened without interruption, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. When she was finished, her voice choked with the pain of retelling it. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply reached out and covered her hand with his. His touch was warm and steady. "You don't have to run anymore, Clara," he said, his voice a vow. "This is your home. I'll not let him touch you or the boy." In that moment, under the vast, open sky, the line between their marriage of convenience and something deeper blurred into oblivion. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust so complete it made his heart ache. He had done it. He had brought life back into the silent, empty corners of his world. But he knew, with a grim certainty, that the man who had cast this shadow would one day come to reclaim it. The day came on a hot afternoon in late summer. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, a dark speck growing steadily larger. Elias, who was mending a fence line, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He'd known this was inevitable. He sent Sam, who was playing nearby, running back to the cabin. "Tell your mother to get inside and bar the door. Go now." The rider was big, just as the poster had suggested, and he sat his horse with an arrogant slump. The scar above his eye was a livid white slash against his tanned skin. He reined in just outside the fence, his eyes scanning the property with a sneer. "I'm looking for my wife," Jedediah Finch said, his voice oily and loud. "Little thing, green eyes. Got my boy with her. Heard she might have passed this way." "You heard wrong," Elias said evenly, not moving from his spot. "There's no one here but me." Finch laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Don't lie to me, farmer. I know she's here. The whole town of Redemption is buzzing about the sad widower and his new bride. Now, you send Clara out, and I'll forget you ever laid hands on my property." The word property sent a surge of hot rage through Elias. "She's not your property," he said, his voice dangerously low. "She's my wife, and you're on my land. I suggest you leave." "Your wife?" Finch spat on the ground. "That horse signed a paper with you? Doesn't matter. She's mine by God's law. And so is the boy." He swung down from his horse, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. But before he could draw, the front door of the cabin opened. Clara stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held steady in her hands, its barrel pointed right at her former husband's chest. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing with a fire Elias had never seen before. "I am not yours, Jedediah," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong across the yard. "I will never be yours again. And you will not touch my son." Finch stared at her, momentarily stunned by her defiance. "You put that gun down, woman, before I—" "You'll do nothing," Elias cut in, taking a step forward. "You'll get on your horse and ride away, or so help me, you'll be buried on this land." For a tense heartbeat, no one moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a roar of fury, Finch lunged, not for Elias, but for the porch, for Clara. It was a fatal mistake. Elias met him halfway, tackling him to the ground. They rolled in the dust, a tangle of limbs and grunts and curses. Finch was bigger, but Elias was wiry and fueled by a righteous fury. He fought not for his life, but for the lives in the cabin behind him. A shot cracked the air. Both men froze. Clara stood on the porch, smoke curling from the rifle barrel she'd fired into the sky. Her message was clear. The fight was over. Finch, bleeding from a cut on his head, scrambled to his feet as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. The sheriff, alerted by a prearranged signal Elias had set up with a neighboring ranch, was arriving with 2 deputies. Finch's face contorted with hate as he saw his chance was gone. They seized him, binding his hands, his threats and curses fouling the peaceful afternoon air. As they dragged him away, Finch locked eyes with Clara one last time. "You'll regret this," he screamed. Clara never wavered. She simply lowered the rifle and watched until he was a disappearing speck on the horizon. The shadow was finally gone. Elias walked over to her, his body bruised and aching. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at her. She met his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw not a victim, but a warrior. They had won. Together. A few nights later, Elias couldn't sleep. The quiet of the house was different now. It wasn't an empty silence, but a peaceful one. He walked out to the barn, the place where it had all started. The moonlight streamed through the loft window, illuminating the stall where he had first found them. And there she was. Clara was sitting in the hay, not sleeping in desperation, but watching the stars, a soft, contented smile on her face. Samuel was asleep beside her, safe and sound. He climbed the ladder quietly. She heard him and turned, her smile widening. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Me neither," he replied, sitting down a respectful distance away. "This place, it feels different now. It was the first place I ever felt safe," she said softly, her gaze drifting back to the heavens. "You gave us that." He looked at her, at the way the moonlight caught the silver threads in her hair, at the strength in the line of her jaw, at the peace that had finally settled in her features. The transaction, the arrangement, the marriage of convenience, it had all fallen away, leaving only a profound and simple truth. His heart, which he had thought buried with Sarah, was beating with a fierce and steady rhythm he had never expected to feel again. He moved closer, his voice just a soft rumble in the quiet barn. He gently touched her cheek, making her turn to face him. He saw his own reflection in her wide, green eyes. "Clara," he began, his voice thick with an emotion that had been building for months. "When I first found you here, I woke you from a nightmare. But you woke me from one, too." He took her hand, his thumb stroking her skin. "I woke you softly then, and I'd do it every morning for the rest of my days." He paused, his gaze intense and unwavering. "Remain eternally beside me." It wasn't a command or a statement. It was a plea, a question, a proposal born not of necessity, but of love. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but this time, they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of joy. She didn't need words. She simply leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a soft, certain kiss that sealed a promise made not with vows before a judge, but with shared hardship, quiet trust, and a love as resilient and vast as the land around them. In the silent witness of the barn, under the distant, watchful stars, 2 broken souls, and the small boy who had bridged their solitudes, finally, truly, became a family. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments.